I have been fascinated by the night sky for as long as I've been able to look up at it. When I wrote my book on heaven back in 2013, I referenced 200 billion galaxies in the known universe, and that number has since been upped to the estimate of being more than 2 trillion galaxies in the known universe, each one with more stars in it than there are grains of sand on the Earth's beaches. It just boggles the imagination. For people like me, viewing the night sky has been an icon, a window onto transcendence, and indeed onto a further recognition of the awe of the divine. Many people have shared that response. So here's a famous quote from Immanuel Kant. Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe, the oftener and the more steadily we reflect on them. Starry heavens above and the moral law within. And not everybody shares that response. Yesterday, I saw this tweet online says, "Dear theists, you're nothing special." And that points to God's favorite planet, God's favorite planetary system, and God's favorite galaxy, each one in perspective reduced to being a mere dot. The implication seemingly being that if something is small by comparison with something else, then it's not special. Of course, that's not a very compelling assumption. So I retweeted with this comment. My wife was stressing over the loss of her favorite gold ring until I pointed out that according to this meme, only big things are special. Of course, the point being that size is not obviously correlated with significance. Having said that, the truth remains that many people believe that something about the size and the great age of the universe presents a serious problem for theism, or more specifically, for Christianity. Talk about this in my book, Conversations with My Inner Atheist, in one of the chapters. So the book features conversations between me and my inner atheist, or Mia for short. And Mia will often ask critical and skeptical questions, and then I am forced to dialogue and converse with Mia in working through those questions. And in chapter 7, we have the question, how can you take Christian claims seriously when the universe is this large and this old? 13.78 billion years old, containing 2 trillion galaxies. How can you take Christian claims seriously? Mia cites, to begin with, one of my favorite literary descriptions of this, which comes from the 19th century and specifically Mark Twain. Now, because it was written in the 19th century, Mark Twain's dates are off, but you will still get the strength of the key metaphor when he refers to the Eiffel Tower and the duration of time. He says, man has been here 32,000 years. That it took 100 million years to prepare the world for him is proof that that is what it was done for. I suppose it is. I don't know. If the Eiffel Tower were now representing the world's age, the skin of paint on the pinnacle knob at its summit would represent man's share of that age, and anybody would perceive that that skin was what the tower was built for. I reckon they would. I don't know. I hope you can feel here, sense Mark Twain's dripping sarcasm. The idea that the skin of paint on the knob of the top of the Eiffel Tower would think the whole process of the tower was just for the appearance of that skin of paint on the knob at the top to appear. And that is just patently absurd. And the thought that the entire history of 13.78 billion years and 2 trillion galaxies, the whole point of that would be reduced to the appearance of human beings on planet Earth, the third rock out from the sun, and the suburbs of the Milky Way galaxy, one of 2 trillion galaxies, is equally absurd and presumptuous. To use a contemporary analogy, if you think about the history of the universe as a 24-hour clock, human beings appear only within the last 2 seconds before midnight. The thought that we would think we are somehow unique or significant in the world or in the universe is just delusional. Mia in the chapter then appeals to another famous example. In 1990, the Voyager spacecraft turned its cameras around out past Saturn and it took a photo of Earth, which came to be known as the pale blue dot. And Carl Sagan famously expostulated on the significance of this pale blue dot, the existential implications of it for human existence. And this is part of what he says, which Mia recalls or quotes in the chapter. Our posturings, imagined self-importance, the delusion we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. So I respond to Mia like this. I said the real issue here is not Christian theism or the truth of Christian theism, but rather the truth of anthropocentrism. In other words, the question of whether the universe was created for human beings and whether we are at the center of the divine cosmic concern. And I would argue that anthropocentrism as such is not a central Christian doctrine. You can read through the Apostles' Creed and you will find no explicit affirmation of anthropocentrism, no requirement to believe that human beings are unique, utterly unique in the universe. Now, Mia is going to dispute this. She says, wait a minute, isn't that precisely what you believe as a Christian? Don't you believe human beings were made in the image of God and that Jesus died to save you? The first part is correct. The second part, not quite. So let me talk about those two issues as we conclude. First of all, yes, human beings are created in the image of God. It doesn't follow, whatever image of God means, it doesn't follow that a Christian, in terms of doctrine, is obliged to believe that human beings are the only sentient creatures in the universe who are created in the image of God. Were we to encounter some ETI, some extraterrestrial intelligence elsewhere in the universe, it could well be the case that those creatures are also created in the image of God. It's just something that Christianity as such does not address. What about the second part, the question of Jesus coming to save human beings? Mia doesn't have it quite right. Now, I understand why she would think that, but the truth is, if you read a chapter like Colossians 1, 15 to 20, Paul clearly describes that the point of salvation, or the point of Christ's coming in salvation, is not simply to save human beings, but to reconcile all things, whether in heaven or on earth, to Jesus, through Jesus to God. In other words, it is to restore all things. It is the redemption of creation, not just human beings. So it's not anthropocentric, it's rather centered on creation itself. Now, you might say, doesn't that even make the problem worse? Because now you're saying that Jesus came to this third rock out from the sun and did something that is going to have an impact on 2 trillion galaxies. Here's an interesting thing. Theologians have actually been talking about that very issue for like 1,000 years. Thomas Aquinas talked about this uh, back in the 13th century. And he speculated on the possibility of multiple incarnations, that if there are civilizations in other parts of creation unattached and unconnected to human beings, maybe there could be an incarnation of God the Son in those places to bring restoration to them. Larry Norman, who was a Christian rock star in the 1970s, had a song called UFO, and he actually sang about this very idea. He said, if there's life on other planets, then I'm sure that he must know. And he's been there once already and has died to save their soul. So that's one possibility, multiple incarnations. Another possibility is, yeah, God the Son uniquely came to planet Earth and is bringing redemption to all of creation, to all 2 trillion plus galaxies through what was accomplished on planet Earth. This is just what we call a version of the scandal of particularity, that God acts in a particular way in space time in a moment that has cosmic implications for all. It's just what it is to accept the Christian story. Some people may find that implausible, others not. But that is just an issue of worldview and one's plausibility framework of how they interpret and view things in reality. One person can view the Earth as a pale blue dot and understandably have a reaction that somehow implies that human beings are unimportant. Another person can have a look at that same image of a pale blue dot and be overcome by the magnificence of God and the transcendence of God in contrast to finite and fallible and frail human creatures. Neither one is the universal, one proper way to interpret the data. The data itself really underdetermines its own interpretation. In other words, the fact that we are minute in the cosmic scheme of things, both physically in space and also through time, just appearing in the last few seconds of a 24-hour day of the universe's clock, doesn't of itself have any interpretation entailed. It is simply the worldview that one brings to that data, which is going to bring about their interpretation as to whether they think that may be an existential crisis for Christianity or just a further manifestation of the incredible implications of Christianity. So, to conclude, I don't think that the simple scale of the universe in terms of size or age is of itself any particular problem for Christianity. It all depends on how you interpret that data. And that's the challenge, I think, of apologetics in this regard, is to give people the right framework, the right interpretive framework to interpret that data in a way that points them to the transcendence of God rather than to a nihilistic understanding of the universe or just a godless atheistic understanding of the universe.